The Royal Guard had been silent the whole time, standing in that immovable, impossible posture. But when President Obama stopped and offered him a handshake, the Guard finally spoke. It was just one sentence, 8 words that made the former Commander-in-Chief visibly shake. "I've never heard anything like that," he said, his voice cracking. And what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Now, before we tell you what those words were, hit that subscribe button and comment below where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The November drizzle wasn't heavy enough to cancel anything, but it was persistent enough to make London feel like it was wrapped in wet wool. Just past 11 in the morning, and the sky hung so low you could almost reach up and touch the clouds with your fingertips. Barack Obama wasn't supposed to be here. Not officially, anyway. No press pool, no advance team, no carefully choreographed photo opportunities. Just a former president in a charcoal overcoat, walking through Wellington Barracks with the kind of quiet purpose that only comes when someone's paying their respects on their own terms. His security detail kept their distance, close enough to do their job, far enough back to let the man breathe. Agent Sarah Mitchell, his lead protection officer, spoke quietly into her sleeve microphone. "Raven is approaching the memorial site, timeline unchanged, weather's holding." "Copy that, Mitchell," came the response from command. "Any irregularities in the area?" "Negative, standard ceremonial posting. 1 Welsh guard on duty, tourists keeping appropriate distance." You could see it in Obama's stride that this wasn't the measured pace of diplomacy. This was personal. He moved like someone carrying weight that had nothing to do with the weather. In his right coat pocket, his fingers absently turned over a small bronze object, a challenge coin he'd been carrying for months without really thinking about it. The Guards Memorial sat in the centre courtyard, simple and dignified under the grey sky. A few tourists huddled under umbrellas nearby, their voices automatically dropping to whispers the way people do in places that demand respect. A schoolteacher was explaining something to her group of 12-year-olds. "Now, remember, children," she said softly, "this memorial honours soldiers who gave their lives in service. We show respect by being quiet and, oh my goodness, is that—" Her voice trailed off as she recognised the familiar figure approaching. One of the children, a boy with gap teeth and unruly hair, tugged on her coat sleeve. "Miss Jenkins, who's that man? Why is everyone staring?" "That's President Obama, Jamie. Former President Obama." "The one from the telly? The American one?" "Yes, but we mustn't disturb him. He's here to pay his respects." A girl named Sophie, wearing thick glasses and clutching a notebook, raised her hand eagerly. "Miss Jenkins, didn't he give that famous speech? The one my dad always talks about." "Which speech, Sophie?" "The one where he said people from different countries could be friends. Dad says it made him cry." Miss Jenkins glanced toward Obama, then back at her students. "Perhaps we'll discuss that later. Right now, we observe quietly." Obama's attention, however, had drifted somewhere else entirely. Across the courtyard, posted outside the South Wing, stood Lance Corporal Dylan Price of the Welsh Guards. 26 years old, 5 tours in Afghanistan, and absolutely motionless under that familiar black bearskin cap. But Price wasn't just standing there out of duty. He was remembering. 3 hours earlier, he'd received a phone call from his sister, Megan, in Cardiff. "Dylan," she'd said, her voice thick with emotion, "I was cleaning out Dad's things and found something. A letter he never sent. It's—" "What do you mean?" addressed to Obama. "I mean he wrote a bloody letter to the American president, Dylan, 3 pages long. It was tucked inside that old cassette player, the one with all his speeches." Dylan had gone quiet, processing. "What did it say?" "Oh, Dylan," Megan's voice had broken. "He wrote about you. About how proud he was that his son stood guard for queens and presidents. About how he listened to Obama's Cairo speech every night when the pain got bad because it reminded him that dignity wasn't dead in the world. The letter, written in his father's careful handwriting just weeks before he died, had been tucked inside that old cassette player like a message in a bottle. Tom Price's final words, never spoken aloud. "Mr. President, my son stands guard at your palaces now." I hope someone tells you that every word you spoke about dignity and hope, my boy carries those words with him every day. You said that every person has something sacred inside them. Well, sir, you helped me remember what that felt like, even when the cancer was taking everything else away. Thank you for giving an old soldier something to believe in again. Perhaps one day you'll meet my Dylan. Perhaps you'll see what your words helped create. Now, as if summoned by his father's unfinished business, the man himself was walking straight toward Dylan. From 50 yards away, Price looked like every other royal guard. Perfect posture, pristine uniform, that legendary stillness. But up close, there were details that told a different story. The way his left hand gripped his rifle, with just enough pressure to keep it steady but not tense. The barely perceptible tension in his jaw that comes from holding position for hours at a time. And tucked beneath the red wool of his tunic, so small you'd miss it unless you knew what to look for, was a thin ribbon of purple and gold. The Elizabeth Cross. But Dylan hadn't received it for combat loss. He wore it for his father, a man who'd died at home, but had earned it through decades of carrying other people's grief. Obama's pace had slowed without him realizing it. Something about the guard's bearing had caught his attention. Not just the ceremony of it, but the presence underneath. The kind of stillness that comes from discipline, yes, but also from something deeper. Agent Mitchell noticed the change in direction immediately. "Raven is deviating from planned route," she murmured into her mic. "Approaching ceremonial guard position." Her partner, Agent Johnson, adjusted his position. "Any cause for concern?" "Negative. Looks like he wants to pay respects. You know how he gets around military personnel." "Roger that. Standard protocols." "For now, let him lead." At the rope barrier, an elderly gentleman in a thick wool coat was explaining something to his granddaughter. "That's a Queen's Guard, love. They stand perfectly still no matter what happens." "What if someone tries to talk to them, Grandpa?" "They're not allowed to respond. It's their duty to remain silent. Even if it's someone important." "Even then, Sarah, even then." Obama stopped 3 feet from the guard, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to show respect for the role and the space. Price didn't react. Couldn't react. Protocol was absolute. Eyes forward, spine straight, breathing controlled. The former President of the United States could have been a lamppost for all the acknowledgement he was officially allowed to give. But inside that perfect stillness, Dylan Price's heart was hammering like a parade drum. He recognized the voice immediately when Obama spoke. "Beautiful morning for standing watch." The words were casual, conversational, but there was something underneath, a warmth that made it clear this wasn't just idle conversation. Price said nothing. Couldn't say anything. The Welsh Guards don't break silence for anyone. But Obama was a man who'd learned to read silence during 8 years of state dinners and diplomatic meetings where the most important conversations happened in the spaces between words. He could see the tension in the guard's jaw, the barely perceptible shift in his breathing. This wasn't indifference, this was control. "I've met a lot of soldiers over the years," Obama continued, his breath visible in the cool air. "Most of them, I shook their hands, thanked them for their service, said the usual things." He paused, studying Price's profile. "But I always wondered about the ones I never got to meet, the ones standing watch while I was sleeping safely." Behind them, the school group had gone completely quiet. Even the children sensed something important was happening. The teacher placed a gentle finger to her lips, but nobody was talking anyway. "Miss Jenkins," the gap-toothed boy whispered, "why isn't the soldier talking back?" "Because that's his job, Jamie, to stand silent and still, no matter what. Even if the president talks to him. Especially then, it's called discipline." Sophie adjusted her glasses and whispered to her friend, "My dad says discipline is doing the right thing even when it's hard." Obama pulled out the challenge coin, turning it slowly between his fingers. The bronze caught what little light filtered through the clouds, the presidential seal gleaming against his palm. "This coin," he said quietly, "I have given maybe 30 of these in 8 years. Always to people who went above and beyond, saved lives, showed extraordinary courage. He paused, watching raindrops collect on the metal surface. But standing here, looking at you, I'm thinking maybe I had it backwards. Price's breathing shifted almost imperceptibly. Obama caught it. Maybe the real courage isn't in the dramatic moments. Maybe it's in standing here, day after day, representing something bigger than yourself. Being a symbol people can believe in. Agent Mitchell, monitoring from her position, spoke softly into her mic. Duration extending beyond planned time frame. Raven appears to be having a moment. Copy that. Any security concerns? Negative. Just let him be human for a minute. Father was military, wasn't he? The question landed like a stone in still water. Price's grip on his rifle tightened just enough that Obama caught it. A tiny tell, invisible to everyone else, but unmistakable to someone who'd spent years learning to read people. I can tell, Obama continued quietly. It's in the way you hold yourself. Not just the training they give you here, but something deeper, something learned at home. The way you carry that rifle, that's not ceremony. That's muscle memory. From the crowd, the elderly gentleman was watching intently. He turned to his granddaughter and said, "Something's happening here, love. Something important." "What do you mean, Grandpa?" "The way that President is looking at our guard, the way he's speaking. This isn't just politeness. This is recognition." Obama extended his hand, palm up, the coin resting in the center like an offering. "I keep this for special occasions. Usually give them to people who've done something extraordinary." He paused, rain beginning to collect on the coin's surface. "But I think I've been measuring extraordinary wrong." The crowd had gone completely silent now. Phones were still recording, but the atmosphere had changed from casual documentation to reverent witnessing. Even the security detail seemed to lean in slightly. Price didn't move, couldn't move. But something shifted in his eyes, just for a fraction of a second, like clouds parting to let through a sliver of sun. Obama waited. He didn't push, didn't assume, just stood there with his hand extended, patient as stone. "Take your time," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." And then, impossibly, Price moved. Not much, just enough. His right hand released its position behind his back with military precision and reached forward to accept the coin. The movement was controlled, deliberate, but it was also unmistakably human, a gesture that bridged the gap between ceremony and connection. Their hands met for just a moment, long enough for Obama to feel the steady strength in the young soldier's grip, long enough for Price to realize this wasn't political theater. This was real. "Thank you," Obama said simply. Price closed his fingers around the coin and returned his hand to position. But his eyes, for the first time since Obama had approached, met those of the former president. That's when the first words came. Quiet, controlled, but carrying the weight of 18 months of perfect silence, finally broken. "My father died this spring, sir." Obama's expression changed instantly. The polite interest vanished, replaced by something deeper. Something that recognized the shape of grief and knew how to hold space for it. "I'm sorry for your loss," Obama said, and the words carried the weight of someone who'd comforted countless grieving families. "What was his name?" "Tom Price, sir. Thomas Arthur Price. Welsh Guards, same as me, but 20 years earlier." "A good Welsh name," Obama observed. "What did he do after his service?" "Drove lorries through the valleys for 20 years. Never complained about it either. Said honest work was honest work." Obama nodded slowly. "Working man." "Working man," Price confirmed. "Never asked for much, but he believed in things, you know? Believed that dignity wasn't just for the wealthy. Believed that words could change how people saw themselves. Sounds like my kind of person." "Tell me about him." Price hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "He had cancer, sir, lung cancer. The last few weeks he couldn't speak much. The medication, you know. But he could listen." "What did he listen to?" "He had this old cassette player, battered thing from the 80s, probably older than me. Red plastic, one speaker that crackled when you turned the volume up, and one recording he asked for every day toward the end." Obama's hands, which had been clasped loosely in front of him, went completely still. Your Cairo speech, sir. June 2009. He'd listened to it on repeat for hours. The former president blinked slowly, processing. The one about new beginnings? About finding common ground? That's the one, sir. He wore out 3 different copies of that tape. Price's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign of the emotion he was keeping in check. Said you were the only politician he'd ever heard who talked about dignity like it was something every person deserved, not just the ones who could vote for you. Behind them, Agent Mitchell found herself wiping her eyes and hoping nobody noticed. What parts did he play most? Obama asked gently. The bit about how every person carries something sacred inside them, and the part where you talked about working people, how they might not get their names in history books, but they're the ones who keep the world running. Obama's eyes widened slightly. I remember writing that passage, stayed up all night getting the words right. Well, sir, you got them right for him. He'd rewind that part and play it over and over. Said it was the first time he'd heard a politician talk about dignity like it was something you earned through work, not something you got handed because of where you were born. The crowd around them had grown larger without either man noticing. Word was spreading through the barracks that something unprecedented was happening. But everyone maintained their distance, sensing that this moment belonged to these 2 men alone. There's something else, Price said, his voice dropping even lower. Something I wasn't sure I should tell you. Obama waited. My sister found a letter this morning. Dad had written it to you, sir. Never sent it. Just tucked it away in that old cassette player. Letter to me? 3 pages long, sir. Written in his careful handwriting, the kind he used for important things. He wrote about how your words helped him through the worst days, how listening to that speech made him feel like he mattered, even when the cancer was taking everything else away. Obama's breathing had gone shallow. What else did he say? He wrote about me, sir. About how proud he was that his son stood guard for queens and presidents. About how he hoped someone would tell you that your words about dignity, that they lived on in places you'd never know about. Jesus, Obama whispered. But here's the thing that'll break your heart, sir. The last line of that letter. He wrote, perhaps one day you'll meet my Dylan. Perhaps you'll see what your words helped create. That's when Obama's composure began to crack. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His eyes filled, not dramatically, not in a way that would make headlines, but enough that anyone watching could see the moment when professional distance collapsed into human connection. He said that? Obama's voice was barely audible. Word for word, sir. My sister read it to me over the phone this morning, made me promise to tell you if I ever got the chance. From the school group, Miss Jenkins was quietly explaining to her students what they were witnessing. This is what real leadership looks like, children. It's not about being important. It's about understanding that every person matters. Little Jamie raised his hand. Miss Jenkins, why is the president sad? He's not sad, Jamie. He's moved. Someone he never met trusted him to say the right thing when it mattered most. Sophie, still clutching her notebook, whispered, Did he say the right thing? Yes, Sophie, he did. There's more, Price continued, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. That morning before he died, the nurses had turned off the tape player because he wasn't responding anymore. But I saw him trying to move his hand toward it, so I put it back on. Obama leaned forward slightly, hanging on every word. Your voice was the last thing he heard, sir. The part where you talk about how every person, regardless of race or religion or nationality, carries something sacred inside them. He died listening to you tell him he mattered. That's when Obama completely lost it. His shoulders shook once, briefly, and he covered his mouth with his hand. Agent Mitchell stepped forward instinctively, then stopped herself, recognizing that her job right now was to give her protectee space to be human. I'm sorry, Obama whispered. I never know how much of what we say actually reaches people. You spend all this time crafting words, hoping they matter, but you never really know. It reached him, sir. It reached him every day for the last 11 years of his life. The elderly gentleman in the crowd had taken off his hat, holding it over his heart. He'd served in Korea, had lost friends, knew what grief looked like. when it finally found a place to land. "Grandpa, why is everyone crying?" his granddaughter asked. "Because sometimes, love, you get to see how one person's words can carry another person through the darkest times. And that's worth crying about." Obama took a shaky breath, trying to compose himself. "Dylan, may I call you Dylan?" "Of course, sir." "Did your father ever say which specific words meant the most to him?" Price nodded. "He used to quote one line back to me whenever I had doubts about what I was doing. The same principle that drives a man to work with dignity in the valleys drives a man to stand guard with honor at a palace." Obama's eyes widened. "I never said those exact words." "No, sir, but that's what he heard when you talked about dignity being universal. That's how your words lived in his mind." "My God," Obama breathed. "He made my speech better than I did." "He made everything better, sir. That was his gift." They stood there for a moment longer, two men connected by the memory of a third who'd found hope in words spoken years earlier to an audience he'd never meet. Obama nodded slowly, then did something no former president should probably do in public. He stepped forward, crossed the invisible boundary that separates civilians from ceremony, and extended his hand, not for a handshake, not for a photo opportunity, but for a connection between two sons who understood what it meant to lose the man who'd taught them how to stand. Price didn't hesitate. He shifted his rifle to his left hand and reached out with his right. Their handshake was brief but firm, the kind that seals understanding rather than making introductions. "Wish I could have met him," Obama said. "You did, sir," Price replied. "Every time he played that tape, he used to say it was like having a conversation with an old friend." "What else did he tell you? About the speech, I mean, about what it meant to him?" Price allowed himself the smallest smile, barely visible, but there. "He said you understood something most politicians miss, that dignity isn't about what you have. It's about how you carry yourself when you don't have much." Obama's voice was thick when he responded. "That sounds like wisdom earned the hard way." 20 years driving lorries through Wales, sir. You learn things about dignity when you're hauling freight at 4 in the morning and still showing up on time because your word matters. "Tell me more about him, please. I need to understand the man who understood my words better than I did." Price glanced around, suddenly aware they had an audience, then seemed to decide it didn't matter. "He never missed a day of work in 20 years, sir. Not one. Even when his arthritis was so bad he could barely hold the steering wheel. Said a man's reliability was his most important possession." "It's the Wales I remember," Obama said, "from my visits. People who understand that character isn't what you do when people are watching." "That's exactly what he'd say, sir. Character is what you do when nobody will ever know about it." Mitchell spoke quietly into her mic. "Command, we're significantly over schedule, but recommend allowing this to continue. This is important." "Copy that, Mitchell. Take all the time he needs." Obama wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring who saw. "Dylan, would you do me several favors?" "If I can, sir." "First, would you give me your sister's contact information? I'd like to write to her about your father." "Of course, sir." "Second, I want to read that letter. Would she be willing to share it?" "I think she'd be honored, sir." "And third," Obama paused, looking directly into Price's eyes, "the next time you stand this post, I want you to remember that you're not just representing the crown. You're carrying your father's dignity with you, and that matters more than you know." Price's voice was steady when he replied, but his eyes were bright. "I will, sir, every day." "Good man." Obama stepped back, respecting the boundary he'd crossed. "Now, I suppose I should let you return to your duties." "Actually, sir, there's one more thing." Obama waited. "That letter my father wrote, the very last line after the part about hoping you'd meet me." "Yes?" "He wrote, 'If you do meet my Dylan, tell him his old man was right about dignity. Tell him it's not what others give you, it's what you refuse to let them take away.'" Obama's composure shattered completely. He pressed both hands to his face and wept. Not the careful tears of a public figure, but the raw grief of a man who'd just received a message from beyond the grave. The crowd watched in complete silence, understanding they were witnessing something sacred. When Obama could speak again, his voice was hoarse. "Consider it delivered, son. Consider it delivered." As quietly as he'd broken it, Price began to restore the silence. He returned his rifle to proper position, straightened his spine, and prepared to resume the perfect stillness that had first caught Obama's attention. But Obama wasn't quite ready to let the moment end. "Dillon," he said, using the guard's name like a benediction. "Yes, sir?" "Your father was right about dignity, and he raised a son who proves it every day." Price nodded once, sharply. "Thank you, sir. That means everything." "Stand tall, son. You're carrying more than you know." Obama turned and walked toward the memorial, with steps that were steadier now than they'd been an hour earlier. He moved like a man who'd just been reminded why words matter, why dignity matters, why the conversation between leaders and citizens never really ends. Behind him, Price resumed his post. The crowd began to disperse slowly, unsure of what they'd witnessed, but certain it had been important. Phones were put away. Whispered conversations started up again. But near the rope barriers, the elderly gentleman was explaining to his granddaughter what she'd just seen. That, love, is what happens when someone realizes their words outlived them in the best possible way. "What do you mean, Grandpa?" "That president thought he was just giving a speech 11 years ago. Today, he found out he'd been keeping a dying man company every night for months." The schoolteacher was gathering her students, but she couldn't resist one more lesson. "Remember this day, children. Remember what it looks like when words travel farther than anyone imagined they could." Jamie raised his hand. "Miss Jenkins, will that guard tell other people about meeting the president?" "No, Jamie. Guards don't talk about their duties, but he'll remember it for the rest of his life." Sophie adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. "Miss Jenkins, do you think the president will remember it too?" "I think, Sophie, this is the kind of thing you never forget." Obama completed his visit to the memorial, laying his wreath with hands that trembled slightly. He stood in silence for several minutes, head bowed, shoulders set against the rain. But his posture had changed. He no longer carried the weight of wondering whether his words mattered. Now he carried the responsibility of knowing they did. Agent Mitchell approached quietly. "Sir, we should probably start moving toward the vehicle." Obama nodded, but didn't move immediately. "Sarah, I need you to do several things for me." "Of course, sir. First, contact information for the Welsh Guards command structure. I'm going to write some letters when we get back." "Letters, sir?" "To a family in Cardiff, to that young man's commanding officer, to some people who deserve to know their words found their target." He paused, watching the guard resume his perfect stillness. "And Sarah?" "Yes, sir?" "Call my speech-writing team. I want the transcript of the Cairo speech. Every draft, every revision, every word we cut. I need to remember what it felt like to write something that mattered that much." "Of course, sir. Anything else?" Obama looked back once more toward the south wing. "Yeah. Clear my schedule tomorrow morning. I'm going to write some letters that should have been written years ago." As his convoy prepared to leave, Obama sat in the back seat and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for his former chief speechwriter. "John, it's Barack. I know it's been a while, but I need to ask you something. That Cairo speech we wrote, do you remember why we included that passage about working people, the one about dignity being universal?" He listened for a moment, then smiled for the first time all day. "I just met someone who made me remember why we do this job, why words matter, why every speech might be someone's last comfort." He paused, watching London roll past through rain-streaked windows. "I'll call you later. Right now I have some letters to write." 3 days later, Megan Price would receive a phone call from the American Embassy. A package was being delivered to her home in Cardiff, a letter from the former president, along with a request. "Price, this is unusual, but Mr. Obama would like to include your father's letter in his presidential library. With your permission, of course. He says it represents something important about how democracy really works, not just in voting booths, but in the quiet moments when people find hope in each other's words." But he'd also done something else. He'd asked his foundation to establish a small scholarship fund for children of service members in Wales. Nothing grand, nothing with his name on it, just help for kids whose parents stood watch while the rest of the world slept safely. The fund would be called the Thomas Arthur Price Memorial Scholarship. For working people's children who understood that dignity wasn't inherited, it was earned. But that day, in the rain outside Wellington Barracks, none of that had happened yet. That day was just about two men finding each other across an impossible distance, connected by the memory of a third who'd believed that words could change the world. And maybe, just maybe, they could. 6 months later, Dylan Price would be promoted to corporal. During the ceremony, his commanding officer would mention that a letter had been received from Washington, a commendation for representing the finest traditions of the Welsh Guards through exceptional dignity under extraordinary circumstances. But Price would never tell anyone about the conversation that led to that commendation. Guards don't discuss their duties. He would, however, keep that bronze challenge coin in his breast pocket every day he stood watch. And sometimes, when the rain fell just right and the wind carried the sound of distant traffic, he'd remember his father's voice mixing with an American president's words, telling him that dignity was something you chose to carry, no matter who was watching. Some conversations change everything, even when they happen in whispers. Some silences are worth breaking, even when it costs you everything. And sometimes a dying man's final wish gets answered by a miracle disguised as coincidence. Would you have broken protocol for a moment like that? Do you think some silences are meant to be broken? And what would you have said if you were standing where that guard stood? If this story reminded you why respect matters, hit that like button. If you want more moments that show the humanity behind the uniforms, subscribe and ring that notification bell. And if someone you know needs to hear about dignity in action, share this video with them. Your next story is waiting on your screen right now. Click it, and I'll see you tomorrow with another moment that proves the most powerful exchanges happen when we remember we're all human. Same time, same place. Don't miss it.